Pete Strzok, he's also already there. I mean, this is not a criminal trial. This is being tried in the court of public opinion. If any of these individuals end up under criminal investigation by the Justice Department, they have much stronger powers and abilities to subpoena any witness they need. What do you make of the calculation about Pat Cipolloni's testimony?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that are probably going through his mind right now, and certainly as he consults with his own counsel about what he is going to testify or not testify before Congress. And some of those, again, 2 points I'd make. One, we know some of the events surrounding January 6th and things that he might have said, according to Ms. Hutchinson. We don't know any number of other things that she was not aware of, that she didn't speak to, that involved events not surrounding the insurrection that Pat Cipollone may or may not have exposure to. He is certainly, I think, going into this discussion and negotiation with Congress with an eye to, at some point, sitting down, if he hasn't already sat down with the Department of Justice, cooperatively or perhaps pursuant to a federal grand jury subpoena, and laying out information. So in areas where he chooses to waive privilege, where he decides privilege is not an issue, all of these things are first being made in the context of what he might or might not say to Congress. But I guarantee you, he and his legal team are absolutely thinking about how that impacts his relationship with all the ongoing criminal investigations of the Department of Justice, most of which are focused around January 6th, but may well include other things that we're simply unaware of because they haven't been touched on by the committee.
David Jolly, I can't for the life of me get a frame around or empathize with wanting to preserve executive privilege at the expense of, at the cost of, not helping the country understand a corrupt president like Donald Trump. I understand executive privilege. I worked in a White House. I know that I worked in a White House. I turned my emails over 2 or 3 times to House oversight investigators. And I know that there's a different standard for the lawyers. But this is different. This was a coup organized by Donald Trump, directed by Donald Trump to overthrow the government he ostensibly led. And I don't understand the sort of glass chamber analysis that executive privilege is a higher priority than investigating a coup plot.
Well, certainly there would be precedent for breaking executive privilege, but it's a high privilege. And I think we will find out, kind of to Barb's point, it may be that Pat Cipollone is welcoming this subpoena. It may be this is exactly what Cipollone needs to actually begin to provide more information. Or we may learn that he resists it and refuses to comply. We don't know. But I think what we may have learned out of the last 48 hours, Nicole, is why they called the emergency hearing with Cassidy Hutchinson. I think it was to set the hook on Pat Cipollone with a subpoena, and they needed time to litigate this subpoena and begin to negotiate, I should say, the better word, the subpoena, because what Cassidy Hutchinson did is said, a key conversation. Mark Meadows, according to Cassidy Hutchinson, Mark Meadows said to Cipollone, you heard him. You heard Donald Trump. He thinks Mike Pence should be hanged. Now, if that is what Cassidy Hutchinson says, then that suggests that Cipollone heard Donald Trump suggest that the violence was permissible against the Vice President of the United States. She also attests that Cipollone said that if the president participates further, we're going to be charged with every crime under the sun, or whatever the phrase was. So I think what we've learned, possibly, the J6 committee was very specific here. They needed Cassidy Hutchinson on the record, set the hook in Pat Cipollone with the subpoena. Perhaps he cooperates, perhaps he doesn't. We'll learn.
It's such a good point, because the last thing we heard from the committee when they went out of session last week was Liz Cheney's public plea for Cipollone to cooperate.
That's right.
And then this emergency hearing was Cassidy Hutchinson. Let me play for all of you all the ways in which Pat Cipollone has already been presented by the January 6th committee to the viewing public.
Jared, are you aware of instances where Pat Cipollone threatened to resign?
I kind of, like I said, my interest at that time was on trying to get as many pardons done. And I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, oh, we're going to resign. We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens. So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
The way it was communicated to me was that Pat Cipollone thought the idea was nutty, and had at one point confronted Eastman basically with the same sentiment.
All anyone is going to think is that you went through 2 attorneys general in 2 weeks until you found the environmental guy to sign this thing. And so the story is not going to be that the Department of Justice has found massive corruption that would have changed the result of the election. It's going to be the disaster of Jeff Clark. And I think at that point, Pat Cipollone said, yeah, this is a murder-suicide pact, this letter.
And we understand, Ms. Hutchinson, that you also spoke to Mr. Cipollone on the morning of the 6th as you were about to go to the rally on the Ellipse. And Mr. Cipollone said something to you like, make sure the movement to the Capitol does not happen. Is that correct?
That's correct. I saw Mr. Cipollone right before I walked out onto West Exec that morning, and Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
Pat Cipollone says we're going to get charged with every crime imaginable. His deputy, Mr. Hirschman, has also testified about effing felonies and effing crimes in extremely colorful language. Mike Schmidt of the New York Times also joins us. And Mike, I want to ask you if there's any analysis inside the Cipollone camp that having his lieutenants testify, who would certainly be availed of the same privilege, claim opportunities, but haven't. And Don McGahn's history of spending, 20 to 30 hours with Robert Mueller for something a lot less explicit than every crime imaginable and effing felonies being committed under his nose.
Look, Pat Cipollone falls into sort of an interesting bucket of people. So there are different types of, the Trump's world was balkanized, was particularly balkanized in this period of time. And Cipollone was part of the group of people who had enabled Trump in the final 2 years of his presidency and then discovered in the final weeks that he didn't really want to follow the rule of law. And so what Cipollone did is he emerges as a guardrail in this period of time as someone who was going to stand up and push back on the president. And what I find most interesting about Cipollone is is the McGahn comparison. The greatest information, the most detailed information, investigative product that the Mueller report came up with was the obstruction sections, and it was based on Don McGahn. There were no junior White House aides who they were relying on. They were not relying on people really outside the White House. They were relying on the White House counsel. And the White House counsel had an enormous amount of information about how Donald Trump was trying to get a hold of the Mueller investigation. And it was incredibly detailed. And the fact that they had access to Don McGahn was why you had over 200 pages of an obstruction section of the report. So if you were to get Cipollone, you are going to have someone that has a very good sense of what the law was and a very good sense of what Trump was trying to do and how he was trying, how the White House counsel was trying to stop him. So it would be incredibly helpful and fruitful for the investigators.